with the start of the much-awaited two-day ICJ hearings on South Africa's genocide case against Israel. And joining me now is Reverend Frank Chikane, the former South African Council of Churches leader. He also is the ANC veteran. Let's speak to him now. Reverend, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Can I quickly latch on to your recent visit to Palestine and ask you what you saw on the ground there?
Well, good morning to your listeners and viewers. We visited Palestine, actually, and parts of Israel. The group went there, 19 of us, took the risk because the Christian communities there felt that the international community had abandoned them, even the churches in the West, Europe and the United States, except one or two churches, had also kept quiet, completely silent about what their countries were doing to support Israel to commit a genocide. They called on us to be there. We went there to be with them. I can't describe all the experiences. I can just say that our experience in entering Bethlehem, which is where Jesus was born, clearly showed the city was under siege. Every entrances were closed. Our bus couldn't go past the checkpoints. We had to get off with our bags, drag them in a street for about 500 meters or so, 300, 500 meters. To be able to go and connect another bus on the other side, because you can't enter or leave the place. And we were told all the cities of the occupied areas are occupied like that. There are killings in Jenin by the Israeli army in Nablus. We wanted to go there and they said we can't go there. So we're talking here about people under siege, and people forget that Gaza was under siege for 16 years before the 7th of October. And people tend to start from the 7th of October and say, this is what created a crisis. But actually, the crisis is because of occupation, illegal occupation of Palestine, and the way in which Palestinians are being treated. The world knows this.
Yeah.
And so that was our experience, yeah.
That last comment from you, Reverend, you are resuscitating the comments you made shortly after your visit to Palestine, and that is that you of the view that the world is not being fair to Hamas by criticizing it for retaliating against exactly what you have just said, which is years of occupation. But what do you say, though, to world powers that continue to not only morally support Israel, but they also giving them material support to say Israel has a right to defend itself?
Yeah, well, let me say firstly that I would phrase your comment differently. The world is unfair against the Palestinians. Remember, Hamas is just one of the entities within Gaza. And people forget that actually Hamas won the election in Gaza, and the world supported Israel to make sure they don't govern Gaza. So I think we forget that. We also forget that people have been dying under the occupation. I was the moderator of the Churches Commission on International Affairs of the World Council from 2016. And I kept on saying to the World Council, people are dying in the occupied areas, but we are not saying anything about it. The day it explodes on the Israeli side, it's then that we'll be talking. So I'm not justifying what Hamas has said. I'm just saying that the world is hypocritical. If Palestinians dies, nobody, on a daily basis, nobody cares. If they are occupied for 56 years, if you count from 48, it's 75 years. Nobody cares. the state of Israel. The UN did a petitioning in 1947-48 to have a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. They helped Israel to have a state up to now. The Palestinians don't have a state. And so you can't have an inequality created in that way. It's really based on racism, settler colonialism, and the US and the Europeans are responsible for this setup because they are the ones who made the decisions in 1947-48. But they've never made sure that justice is done for the Palestinians. And I think that's where South Africa comes in. We have experienced apartheid here. They have perfected it there. And if we had time, I can talk about how they perfected it from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. We can see apartheid there. We experienced it. That's why South Africa can't stand by and do nothing. And Mandela did say that our freedom is not complete until Palestine is free. And so that's why we are at the International Criminal, the International Court of Justice today to take a stand. And no country took that stand. And I must say to you that I am, after a long time, feel very proud about being South African for standing against the odds for justice, not the way in which the powerful countries want us to behave.
Reverend Chikane, I'm glad that you're pushing the discussion now to what is going to be a fixation on what is going to come out of the ICJ today and tomorrow. But we've got to look at almost a holistic background. The United Nations institution has been criticized for some time for essentially not doing its job. I remember our Minister of International Relations and Cooperation being very frustrated with the United Nations. So here we are, again, looking to a court that is linked to that institution, and we are hoping for some positive that will come out of there. And what is that positive? For the bombardment of the people of Palestine, including the children who have died. Many have died, close to 10,000 of them. So why should the world be hopeful, Reverend, that after we have gone to that court, any result that comes out of there will indeed give the people of Palestine some hope that the world has not abandoned them?
Well, let me explain that by starting from, again, 1947-48. Remember, the UN is a construct of colonial powers. We were not there. We were colonized when they structured the UN. So the UN is structured in a way that it empowers the powerful to do what they like, but punish the weak. That's how the UN is. And indeed, this court, it's subject to decisions of the Security Council. But let me tell you what my view is. My view is that in the same way as the European countries and USA supported the apartheid system, we mobilized the people against those governments until they forced them to change, and even adopted sanctions resolutions. It's the same thing with Palestine. This court case, it's about the international, it's about justice, it's about morality. And you can see the support for South Africa for what South Africa has done. I mean, the world is shaping up to focus on what South Africa is doing. And what we're doing is to mobilize the world. And the majority of the countries in the world, the populations, will take sides against this brutality and genocide against Palestinians. And I've said to our European brothers and sisters, The world watched when Jews were killed. There was genocide against the Jews. It's a Holocaust done by Europeans. The world did nothing. We can't stand today when the Israelis do the same and do nothing. And that's the position we've taken. And we believe, based on what South Africa has gone through, it is possible to mobilize the world against the powerful. And that power does come to an end. There's no empire that lasted forever. And if people think that those who have power can dictate and kill people at will, they are making a big mistake. And that's my expectation. So what's going to happen at the court today is to get the world to stop and listen and watch and then be able to make their decision, not the court or the Security Council itself. Whatever outcome of the court really for me doesn't matter. I wish that those judges will behave like real justices, who are not going to be influenced by their countries, because the weakness of the UN system is that the powerful determine what happens. They even influence judges. I mean, they talk about democracy, separation of powers, but when it comes to the UN, there's no separation of powers. They fold judges and say, we want you to take the following position. I hope that the judges will work on the basis of their conscience and that they will make a right decision. But whatever happens, by the end of this court, the world would have changed.
Reverend, I would like to share in your optimism. Just a few minutes ago, or should we say in the last hour, I had a conversation with Paul Holden, and the conversation in part was about whether or not, if indeed this particular court comes to a conclusion that indeed there is genocide that is taking place there is still the crucial element of enforceability of that decision, and that court has no power to enforce it, nor can it take it to the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council. And so morality, exactly what you've just pointed out, that morally Israel will then be bound to take a step back and pause on what it is doing. Do you think that that country's leadership has the moral capacity to say, a court has spoken and we will respect that decision?
Well, we don't depend on the moral uprightness of the leaders of that country, because they are the ones who are actually advancing this genocide. You just have to go through the comments they have made, which are going to be laid bare at the court today. No, let me just say, if we depended on the hearts of the apartheid leaders, we would still be oppressed today. If we depended on the hearts of Europe and the USA to change on their own, we would still be oppressed today. I think our experience, and my experience at least, is that it is the mobilization of the people on the ground that will force the powerful to change. We decided to make sure that the apartheid system can govern us. I was part of the leadership of the United Democratic Front. We didn't have nuclear weapons. We didn't have the chemical weapons. The apartheid system had them, given to them and held by Israel and the Western powers. But we took on the system and we made sure that it's ungovernable, and then it collapsed. I think the regime of apartheid between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean system will come to an end, because even the United States will not be able to sustain what they are doing. Even the Jewish people within Israel, we have met some of those Jewish people. That's why we went to Tel Aviv as well. And they have said they are against what their government is doing. There will be no future for the Jewish Israelis there if they continue to treat the Palestinians the way they are treating them, And if Israel relies on the United States, power doesn't last forever. Empires come to an end. So I think they need to realize that. And the good thing about the South Africans, Afrikaners here, they realized they can't sustain that. And they started negotiation. And I'm hoping that the Israeli leadership will realize that they can't sustain this. If the court rules against them, their moral basis collapses, and those who support them become accomplices to the genocide. I mean,
Reverend,
the way the U.S. has supported Israel, if the court says this is genocide, it means the United States aided genocide. And I don't think that they will survive that position.
Reverend Frank Chikane, let me thank you very much for your time.